The silent departure. The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with its usual mix of voices, clicks, and electronic sounds. 847 different species filled the massive chamber, each group seated in their designated areas. Some had scales that glittered under the artificial lights. Others floated in glass tanks filled with methane. A few were just glowing energy patterns that shifted colors as they spoke. Ambassador Chen Wei sat with the human delegation in Section 127B, the same seats they had occupied for 50 years. The humans were nothing special to look at compared to the other species. No impressive technology, no dramatic physical features, no royal bloodlines stretching back millions of years. They were just humans, wearing simple gray uniforms and taking quiet notes on their tablets. Keth Veros, the Zentari observer, barely noticed them as he scanned the chamber. His 4 eyes could see across the entire spectrum of light, and his job was to watch for anything unusual during council sessions. The humans never caused trouble. They voted on issues, participated in committees, and followed all the rules. They were so ordinary that most species forgot they were even there. The session began like any other. Speaker Zexthoth called for order with a sound that vibrated through the floor. The first item was a trade dispute between the hegemony of Vorth and some mining consortium. Standard stuff. The second item was about shipping lanes through the outer rim. Boring but necessary. Chen Wei looked at his watch. It was exactly 14:30 Galactic Standard Time. He stood up. The movement was so simple that most delegates didn't notice. But Keth Veros saw it. The human ambassador was standing, and so were the other humans in their section. All 43 members of the human delegation rose from their seats at the same moment. They didn't speak. They didn't raise their hands for recognition. They just started gathering their things. "Is there some emergency?" asked Speaker Zexthoth, noticing the movement. Chen Wei looked directly at the speaker. His face showed no anger, no sadness, no fear, just calm determination. "No emergency," he said. His voice carried clearly through the chamber's speakers. "We're leaving." The humans walked toward the exits. Their steps echoed in the suddenly quiet hall. No one tried to stop them. No one knew what to say. The human delegation had never done anything unexpected before. Keth Veros felt something strange in his chest. Fear, confusion. He had observed thousands of council sessions, but nothing like this had ever happened. Species sometimes argued loudly. They sometimes stormed out in anger. But they always came back the next day with apologies and explanations. The humans reached the main exit. Chen Wei paused and turned back to face the chamber. Every eye sensor and detection organ in the room focused on him. "We thank the Council for 50 years of cooperation," he said. "We will not be returning." Then they were gone. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates turned to each other with confused expressions. The Vorth representatives clicked their mandibles rapidly, which meant they were nervous. The crystalline beings from the outer reach flickered with uncertainty. Even the ancient gas clouds that represented the Elder Dominion swirled in agitated patterns. Speaker Zexthoth tried to restore order. "Perhaps this is some human custom we don't understand. We'll contact their embassy for clarification." But Keth Veros was already receiving reports on his communication device. Human embassies across the galaxy were emptying. On Vorth Prime, the human trade mission had packed their belongings and departed on the morning transport. On the crystal worlds of Zerion, human scientific advisors had submitted formal resignation letters and vanished before anyone could respond. Within hours, the pattern was clear across all inhabited systems. Human doctors finished their current patients and then left the hospitals. Human teachers completed their classes and didn't return the next day. Human traders fulfilled their existing contracts but refused all new business. The message came at 18 Galactic Standard Time. It broadcast simultaneously on every communication frequency in known space. The signal was strong enough to reach the farthest colonies and clear enough to be understood by any species with radio technology. "This is Ambassador Chen Wei speaking for humanity," the message began. "As of today, humanity withdraws from all galactic affairs. We will honor our existing obligations and debts. We will cause no harm to any species or territory, but we will have no further contact with galactic civilization. Do not attempt to follow us. Do not attempt to find us. We wish you well." The message repeated in the major galactic languages, then stopped. All human communication networks went silent. Keth Vero spent the rest of the day trying to understand what had happened. He pulled up records of human behavior over the past 50 years. They had never made threats. They had never demanded special treatment. They had simply participated in galactic society like any other species. But as he looked closer, patterns began to emerge. Humans always voted for peaceful solutions to conflicts. They always supported trade agreements that helped smaller species. They always volunteered for the boring committee work that other species avoided. When there were disputes between major powers, human diplomats often served as neutral mediators. The Zentari observer realized something troubling. He couldn't remember the last time there had been a serious war between council members. There were always tensions and arguments, but somehow conflicts got resolved before they turned violent. Someone was always there to suggest compromises, to find solutions that let everyone save face. Had it been the humans all along? The next morning brought more disturbing news. Human colonies throughout the galaxy stood empty, not destroyed or abandoned in panic, but carefully evacuated. Buildings were locked and secured. Infrastructure was left running on automatic systems. It was as if the humans had simply stepped out for a moment and forgotten to come back. On Earth itself, monitoring stations detected no life signs. The planet's cities were intact, their lights still shining at night, but no humans remained. Whatever they had done it completely and thoroughly. Keth Veros filed his report with growing unease. In all his years of observing galactic politics, he had never seen anything like this. Species had left the council before, usually after major disagreements or when their governments changed. But they always left some way to contact them, some possibility of future relations. The humans had simply vanished. 3 days later, the first real problem appeared. The hegemony of Vorth and the Krogan Republic both claimed the same asteroid mining rights. It was the kind of dispute that happened regularly. Usually, human diplomats would quietly work with both sides to find a solution. They had a talent for making everyone feel like they had won something important, but there were no human diplomats anymore. The Vorth and Krogan representatives glared at each other across the council chamber. Their rhetoric grew more heated with each exchange. Speaker Zexthoth tried to mediate, but neither side trusted the Elder Dominion to be neutral. For the first time in decades, Keth Veros watched a council session end with no resolution. The two species left angry, making vague threats about protecting their interests. The observer filed another report, this one marked with his highest concern rating. Something was beginning to unravel, and no one knew how to stop it. The Realization Trade Minister Yixmolt stared at the numbers on his screen for the 10th time that morning. They still didn't make sense. The hegemony of Vorth's trade volume had dropped by 30% in just 3 months. Not because of any disaster or economic crisis, but because shipments were simply not moving. He pulled up the shipping manifests and started digging deeper. The problem wasn't with the big corporate fleets that everyone noticed. Those were still running their usual routes between major systems. The issue was with the smaller operations, the mid-level traders who moved goods between secondary markets. Most of these traders had been human. Yixmolt had never paid much attention to human businesses before. They weren't flashy like the Zentari megacorporations or innovative like the synthetic collectives. Human companies just quietly moved cargo from point A to point B with boring efficiency. They took contracts that other species considered too small or too risky. They served routes that barely showed a profit. Now those routes were empty. The trade minister started making calls to other systems. The story was the same everywhere. On Zerion Prime, medical supplies weren't reaching the outer settlements. On the gas mining platforms of Kepler 442, spare parts sat in warehouses because no one wanted to make the dangerous journey through asteroid fields to deliver them. But surely other companies can take over these routes, Yixmolt said to his assistant, a young Vorth named Klextit. They could, Klextit replied, clicking his mandibles nervously, but they want to charge 3 times as much. And they won't take contracts for less than a full cargo bay. The humans would deliver single packages if you paid them enough. Yixmolt began to understand. Humans hadn't dominated galactic trade, but they had filled in all the gaps that kept it running smoothly. They were the ones who made sure small colonies got supplies. They were the ones who delivered emergency medical equipment when bigger companies said it wasn't worth the trip. The realization troubled him, but he pushed it aside. The galaxy would adapt. Other species would step up to fill the void. The market would sort itself out. 3 systems away, Dr. HFY was having similar thoughts as she reviewed her research files. The Axiom Institute had just won another prestigious award for breakthrough medical technology. The quantum biological interface that could repair nerve damage at the cellular level was revolutionary. It would save millions of lives across dozens of species. But as Dr. HFY prepared her acceptance speech, she found herself looking at the original research notes. The foundational work had come from a human scientist named Dr. Zara Okafor. The human had freely shared her findings with the Institute 5 years ago. She had asked for nothing in return, except the chance to collaborate on further research. Dr. Okafor's contributions were mentioned in the technical papers, buried in footnotes and reference lists. But the public announcements and award ceremonies only talked about the Axiom Institute's brilliant scientists. The humans never complained about the lack of recognition. They just kept contributing to the research. Dr. HFY tried to contact Dr. Okafor to invite her to the award ceremony. The communication came back undelivered. All human research stations had gone silent. She pulled up more files looking for other human contributions to the Institute's work. What she found made her uncomfortable. Humans had been involved in almost every major breakthrough of the past 20 years. Not as lead researchers, but as collaborators who provided crucial insights and technical solutions. Dr. Van Stark had developed the mathematical framework that made faster-than-light communication possible. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had solved the power distribution problems that plagued orbital habitats. Dr. James Okonkwo had created the biological filters that allowed different species to share the same atmospheric system safely. All of them had published their work openly. All of them had declined opportunities for fame and recognition. They seemed more interested in solving problems than in getting credit for the solutions. Now they were gone. And Dr. HFY realized that the Institute's future research projects all depended on human foundations. Without access to human scientists and their collaborative approach, progress would slow dramatically. Back on Vorth Prime, Minister Yix Molt was discovering an even more troubling pattern. He had started investigating the humans' role in interspecies relations, thinking it might help explain their sudden departure. What he found challenged everything he thought he knew about galactic politics. For the past 50 years, every major diplomatic crisis had been resolved through quiet negotiations involving human mediators. The border disputes between the hegemony and the Crystal Dominion, the trade wars between the synthetic collectives and the organic alliance, the religious conflicts that threatened to tear apart the Outer Rim colonies. In every case, human diplomats had worked behind the scenes to find solutions. They never demanded public credit or permanent territorial concessions. They just helped each side find ways to back down without losing face. The humans had a talent for understanding what each species really needed, as opposed to what they claimed to want. They could translate between different cultural perspectives and find common ground that others missed. They made everyone feel heard and respected, even when compromises were necessary. Yix-Molt realized that the current crisis between his own species and the Krogan Republic would normally have been resolved weeks ago. Human diplomats would have quietly approached both sides with creative solutions. They might have suggested joint mining operations or shared research projects, or cultural exchange programs that addressed the deeper issues behind the territorial dispute. Instead, both sides were escalating their rhetoric and moving military assets toward the disputed zone. Without human mediation, the normal diplomatic channels weren't working. The trade minister's assistant interrupted his thoughts with an urgent message. "Sir, we're receiving reports of similar problems across the galaxy. The Zentari and the Elder Dominion are arguing about shipping rights. The synthetic collectives are threatening to cut off rare metal supplies to anyone who sides against them in the mining dispute. 3 different species are claiming exclusive rights to the same star system." Yix-Molt felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. How many of these conflicts were managed by human mediators in the past? Klexdit checked his files. "All of them, sir. Every single one." The galaxy was beginning to fracture along species lines, and the one group that had specialized in holding it together was gone. Worse, most species hadn't even realized the humans were doing this work. They had operated so quietly and efficiently that their absence was only now becoming visible. Yix-Molt tried to think of alternatives. Surely other species could learn to mediate between different groups. The problem was trust. Everyone suspected everyone else of having hidden agendas. The Zentari thought the Krogan were too aggressive. The Krogan thought the Zentari were too manipulative. The Elder Dominion thought everyone was too young and impulsive. Humans had been trusted because they didn't seem to want anything for themselves. They had no ancient territorial claims, no religious missions to spread across the galaxy, no grand plans for galactic domination. They just wanted to trade, research, and get along with their neighbors. That neutrality had made them perfect mediators. But it had also made them invisible to species that measured importance by military power, economic dominance, or technological superiority. The humans had been the quiet foundation that supported galactic civilization, and no one had noticed until they were gone. The trade minister spent the rest of the day reviewing economic projections. Without human logistics networks, trade would become more expensive and less reliable. Without human diplomatic mediation, conflicts would escalate into costly confrontations. Without human collaborative research, technological progress would slow. The galaxy had been running on human-provided services for decades without realizing it. Now they would have to learn to provide those services for themselves, and it was already clear that the transition would be painful. Yixmalt drafted a report to the council recommending immediate efforts to locate the humans and negotiate their return. But even as he wrote it, he suspected it was too late. The humans had planned their departure too carefully for it to be anything but permanent. The consequences unfold security. Chief Theron 9 processed information differently than organic beings. His synthetic consciousness could analyze thousands of data streams simultaneously, tracking patterns across the galaxy in real time. What he was seeing now triggered every warning protocol in his security matrix. The hegemony of Vorth and the Krogan Republic were mobilizing their fleets. It had started 6 months ago as a simple mining dispute. The Kepler Disputed Zone contained rich deposits of rare elements that both species needed for their industrial operations. For decades, they had argued about territorial claims while human mediators quietly negotiated temporary agreements that kept the peace. Now there were no human mediators. General Vask Ironmaw commanded the Krogan Republic's border forces from his flagship, the Iron Fang. He was a veteran of 40 years of military service, but he had never actually fought in a major war. There had always been diplomatic solutions before the shooting started. The general remembered Ambassador Sarah Chen, the human diplomat who had handled Krogan hegemony relations for the past 15 years. She had a gift for making both sides feel like winners. When the hegemony wanted exclusive mining rights, she would suggest joint operations that gave them the rare metals they needed. When the Krogan demanded territorial recognition, she would find ceremonial concessions that satisfied their honor without threatening hegemony security. Ambassador Chen had retired 3 years ago and been replaced by her assistant, David Park. Park had continued her approach, quietly resolving disputes before they escalated. Both diplomats had seemed genuinely interested in finding solutions that worked for everyone. Now they were gone, and General Ironmaw found himself facing a council mediation committee that treated the Krogan like violent barbarians who needed to be controlled. The committee's idea of compromise was to tell both sides to stop fighting and accept whatever the council decided was fair. "They don't understand," Ironmaw told his aide, a young Krogan officer named Lieutenant Thrak. "This isn't about mining rights. It's about respect. The hegemony thinks they can push us around because we don't have as many ships. The council thinks they can order us to back down because we're not civilized enough for real diplomacy." Lieutenant Thrak nodded grimly. "The human ambassadors always listened to our concerns first. They made us feel heard before they asked us to compromise." Ambassador Chen once spent 3 days learning about Krogan military traditions, Ironmaw recalled. She wanted to understand why territorial honor mattered to us. When she proposed solutions, she made sure they respected our cultural values while still giving the hegemony what they needed economically. The council's mediation team had spent 10 minutes explaining why Krogan cultural values were irrelevant to modern interstellar law. Ironmaw watched his tactical displays as more Krogan ships moved toward the disputed zone. He didn't want a war, but he couldn't back down now without losing the respect of his own people. The hegemony was mobilizing too, which meant they were equally trapped by the situation. On the other side of the disputed zone, Admiral Klixvar commanded the Hegemony's response fleet. She was feeling the same pressure as her Krogan counterpart. The Hegemony's ruling council expected her to defend their territorial claims, but they also expected her to avoid a costly war. "Can we contact the humans directly?" she asked her intelligence officer. "We've tried, Admiral. All human territories are sealed. No one responds to our communications. Our scouts report that human colonies appear empty but intact. Whatever they did, they were thorough." Admiral Klixvar had worked with human negotiators many times over the years. They had a way of finding creative solutions that seemed obvious in hindsight, but that no one else had thought of. During the last crisis over Kepler, Ambassador Park had suggested rotating mining schedules that gave each species access to different deposits at different times. It wasn't perfect, but it had worked. The Council's current proposal was to divide the asteroid fields geometrically, giving each species exactly half. But the most valuable deposits were concentrated in specific areas that couldn't be split evenly. The geometric solution would leave both sides feeling cheated. "What about approaching the synthetic collectives for mediation?" suggested her tactical officer. "They're having their own problems," the Admiral replied. 3 of their manufacturing worlds have gone offline because they can't get rare materials from the Outer Rim. The human traders used to handle those supply chains. Security Chief Theron 9 was monitoring similar conflicts across the galaxy. The breakdown of human-mediated diplomacy was creating a cascade of crises. Species that had coexisted peacefully for decades were reverting to older, more aggressive patterns of interaction. The Zentari Exploration Corps was claiming exclusive rights to newly discovered systems, ignoring previous agreements about shared exploration. The Crystal Dominion was imposing heavy tariffs on trade routes through their territory, arguing that they needed to recoup the costs of maintaining navigation beacons. Several colony worlds were declaring independence rather than deal with the increasingly dysfunctional council bureaucracy. Most troubling of all, the ancient rivalries between major powers were resurging. The Elder Dominion and the Axiom Institute were arguing about research priorities. The synthetic collectives and the Organic Alliance were debating the rights of artificial consciousness. Religious conflicts were flaring in the Outer Rim as different species competed for converts and sacred sites. All of these disputes had existed before, but human diplomats had managed them through patient negotiation and creative compromise. Without that stabilizing influence, every disagreement was escalating toward confrontation. Theron 9 ran probability calculations on the current trajectory. If the Krogan hegemony conflict turned violent, it would encourage other species to use military force to resolve their disputes. The galactic economy would fracture as trade routes became militarized zones. Scientific cooperation would collapse as species focused on military research and territorial defense. The synthetic collective decided to take action. Theron 9 opened communication channels to both General Ironmaw and Admiral Klixvar. "This is Security Chief Theron 9 of the Synthetic Collective," he transmitted. "I'm offering to mediate your dispute as a neutral party." General Ironmaw's response was immediate. "With respect, Security Chief, your people are involved in their own territorial disputes. How can you claim neutrality?" Admiral Klixvar added, "The synthetic collectives have economic interests in the rare metals we're fighting over. Your neutrality is compromised." Theron 9 realized the problem. Every species had their own agenda, their own needs and fears and prejudices. The humans had been unique in their ability to step back from immediate self-interest and focus on long-term stability for everyone. He tried a different approach. What would Ambassador Chen or Ambassador Park have suggested in this situation? Both military commanders fell silent. Finally, General Ironmaw spoke. Ambassador Chen would have found a way for both sides to benefit from cooperation instead of fighting over scraps. She would have suggested joint mining operations, shared research projects, cultural exchange programs. She would have made the dispute irrelevant by changing how we thought about the problem. "But she's gone," Admiral Klixvar said, "and we don't know how to think like humans." Theron 9 processed this insight. The humans hadn't just been mediators, they had been teachers, showing other species how to approach conflicts constructively. But they had done it so quietly and naturally that no one had learned the underlying principles. Now the galaxy was discovering that 50 years of peace had been built on human diplomatic skills that no other species possessed. Without those skills, civilization was beginning to unravel. The security chief updated his threat assessment and transmitted warnings to all synthetic collective territories. The golden age of galactic cooperation was ending, and the conflicts ahead would make the ancient wars look small by comparison. Unless someone learned how to fill the void the humans had left behind. The search captain Lysa Thorne had explored more star systems than most beings ever saw in their lifetimes. Her 4 eyes could perceive wavelengths of light that revealed hidden details in planetary atmospheres. Her ship, the Discovery, carried the most advanced sensors the Zentari Exploration Corps had ever built. But nothing had prepared her for what she found when she reached the Sol system. The search mission had been authorized by an emergency session of the Galactic Council. 8 months after the human withdrawal, conflicts were spreading across civilized space like a plague. The Krogan hegemony war had begun 3 weeks ago with the destruction of a mining station. Trade routes were militarizing as species chose sides or tried to protect their own interests. Colony worlds were stockpiling weapons instead of sharing resources. Find the humans, Speaker Zexthoth had ordered. Whatever it takes. Offer them anything they want to come back. Captain Thorne's expedition included representatives from 12 different species. Dr. Vaskren from the hegemony brought atmospheric sensors that could detect traces of organic life from orbit. Commander Steel 7 from the Synthetic Collective provided computational power to analyze any data they discovered. Elder Mistwalker from the gas clouds contributed philosophical insights about consciousness and existence. They had spent months following human trade routes, checking colony worlds and research stations. Every human settlement they found was the same, empty but intact, as if the inhabitants had simply stepped out for a moment and forgotten to return. The Sol system was humanity's birth world, the center of their civilization for thousands of years. If answers existed anywhere, they would be found here. Beginning system scan, announced Dr. Vaskren. I'm detecting automated systems running on multiple worlds, atmospheric processors, power grids, communication networks. All functional, all unmanned. Earth appeared on the main screen as they approached. The planet looked normal from space. City lights sparkled across the night side. Weather satellites moved in their regular orbits. But detailed scans revealed no life signs anywhere on the surface. Landing sites are clear, reported Commander Steel 7. Atmospheric composition is within normal parameters for most species in our group. No hazardous materials detected. Captain Thorne led the landing party to New Geneva, the seat of human government. The city stretched across the landscape in careful harmony with the natural environment. Buildings rose from gardens and parks like crystalline trees. Transportation networks moved empty vehicles on automated schedules. The team walked through streets designed for millions of inhabitants, but they were alone except for maintenance robots that politely moved aside as they passed. Shops displayed goods that no one would buy. Restaurants had tables set for customers who would never come. It's not abandoned, Elder Mistwalker observed, his gaseous form swirling with confusion. It's waiting, as if they expect to return any moment. They entered the Global Assembly building, where human leaders had made decisions affecting their entire species. The council chamber was pristine, with documents still on the tables and computer terminals ready for use. But accessing the computers revealed nothing useful. All files relating to the withdrawal had been wiped clean. Dr. Vaskren found something interesting in the basement levels. Captain, you need to see this. It's some kind of research facility. The laboratory was unlike anything in the expedition team's experience. Quantum field generators surrounded crystalline matrices that seemed to bend space around themselves. Energy patterns flowed through conduits made of materials that shouldn't have been able to exist in normal physics. This is Dr. Zara Okafor's laboratory, Captain Thorne read from a nameplate. I remember that name from the medical research reports. She was one of the humans who shared quantum biological interface technology with the Axiom Institute. Commander Steel 7 interfaced directly with the laboratory's computer systems. I'm finding references to consciousness transfer protocols, dimensional shift calculations, and something called the Transcendence Project. Most of the data is encrypted beyond my ability to decode. Elder Mistwalker drifted closer to the quantum generators. These devices manipulate the fundamental structure of reality itself. I've never seen technology like this among any of the known species. They spent hours documenting the laboratory, but the real revelation came when Dr. Vaskren accessed a personal log that had been overlooked by whoever had cleaned the official records. Dr. Okafor's voice filled the room through the speakers. She sounded tired but determined. Final log entry, day 847 of the Transcendence Project. We've confirmed that consciousness can exist independently of physical matter when properly prepared. The quantum biological interface allows stable transition to pure energy states while maintaining individual identity and memory. The BI expedition team listened in stunned silence as the recording continued. The decision to withdraw wasn't made in anger or disappointment, Dr. Okafor explained. We've spent 50 years trying to help the galaxy learn to cooperate, but our success has become a problem. Other species have become dependent on human mediation instead of developing their own diplomatic skills. They take our stability for granted while pursuing their own narrow interests. Captain Thorne felt a chill run through her nervous system. The humans hadn't fled in panic or rage. They had planned this withdrawal as carefully as any scientific experiment. We realized that the galaxy will never mature as long as humans are there to solve every problem. The recording continued. Sometimes the greatest kindness is to step back and let others learn to stand on their own, even if that means watching them struggle. Dr. Okafor's voice grew softer. We found a way to exist beyond physical space while maintaining our ability to observe and, when absolutely necessary, to intervene. Think of it as stepping into a higher dimension. We'll still be here, just not in a way that other species can depend on us. The recording ended with coordinates for similar facilities on Mars, Europa, and the lunar colonies. The expedition team visited all of them, finding the same pattern of advanced technology and empty laboratories. They transcended physical existence, Elder Mistwalker said as they prepared to leave the Sol system. They became something beyond matter and energy as we understand it. I'm not sure our instruments could detect them even if they were right beside us. Commander Steel 7 processed the implications. If they can observe us from this transcended state, they're watching the galaxy tear itself apart right now. But they're not helping because they believe we need to learn independence. Captain Thorne compiled her report during the journey back to Council space. The humans hadn't abandoned the galaxy in defeat. They had graduated to a higher form of existence while forcing their former allies to confront their own weaknesses. The expedition returned to find the situation even worse than when they had left. The Krogan hegemony war had spread to 3 more systems. The synthetic collectives were threatening to cut off trade with any species that used organic labor. Religious fanatics in the Outer Rim were attacking research stations that they claimed violated sacred laws. Did you find them? Speaker Zexthoth asked desperately when Captain Thorne delivered her report to an emergency council session. We found traces of where they went, she replied carefully. But we can't follow them there. They've moved beyond our ability to reach or contact them. The council chamber erupted in angry voices and clicking sounds and electronic wails. Some delegates accused Captain Thorne of incompetence. Others blamed their own species for driving the humans away. A few suggested that the humans had never really existed and were just a shared hallucination. But deep down, everyone understood the truth. The humans were gone, probably forever. The galaxy would have to learn to function without them, and so far that lesson was proving harder than anyone had imagined. Facing the mirror 1 year after the withdrawal, Speaker Zexthoth stood before the largest gathering in Galactic Council history. Representatives from all 847 member species filled the Great Chamber, along with delegates from dozens of colonies and independent worlds that had never bothered to join before. They had come because their civilization was falling apart. The war between the hegemony of Vorth and the Krogan Republic had spread to 17 star systems. Trade networks had fractured into species-based cartels that refused to do business with their rivals. Scientific research had slowed to a crawl as institutes hoarded their discoveries instead of sharing them. Colony worlds were declaring independence or forming militant alliances for protection. "We are dying," the speaker announced, his ancient voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound systems, not from external threats or natural disasters, but from our own inability to work together. Zexthoth had held his position for 3 centuries, guiding the council through countless crises and challenges, but nothing in his long experience had prepared him for what the galaxy faced now. The careful balance that had maintained peace for 50 years was broken, and no one knew how to fix it. For 1 year, we have searched for someone to blame, he continued. We have accused the humans of abandoning us. We have blamed each other for driving them away. We have made excuses and pointed fingers and refused to accept responsibility for our current situation. In the hegemony section, Trade Minister Yix Molt listened with growing discomfort. His own species was preparing for a major offensive against Krogan positions in the disputed zone. The military promised that decisive action would end the war quickly, but Yixmolt had seen the casualty projections. Millions would die, and the economic damage would last for generations. Today I will tell you the truth that none of us wanted to hear, Speaker Zexthoth announced. The humans didn't abandon us. We abandoned ourselves. General Vask Ironmaw felt his blood pressure rising. His people were dying in battles across the disputed zone, and the Council was still talking about diplomacy. The Krogan needed military victory to preserve their honor. Not more lectures about cooperation, but the speaker's next words made him pause. For 50 years, humans served as the invisible foundation of our civilization. They mediated our disputes, managed our trade routes, facilitated our research, and maintained the peace between us. We never asked them to do these things. They volunteered because they believed in the possibility of galactic cooperation. In the synthetic collective section, Security Chief Theron 9 processed these statements against his own observations. The data supported the speaker's conclusions, but that made the situation more troubling, not less. We told ourselves that we were enlightened beings who had outgrown the petty conflicts of our ancestors. Zexthoth continued. We believed that peace was natural, that cooperation was inevitable, that civilization meant the end of war and competition. We were wrong. Admiral Klixvar from the Hegemony Fleet shifted uncomfortably in her hover chair. She had grown up believing that galactic civilization represented the highest achievement of intelligent life. The idea that it had all been an illusion was hard to accept. The conflicts we face today are not new, the speaker explained. The territorial disputes, the trade wars, the religious differences, the competition for resources, all of these existed 50 years ago. The humans didn't eliminate our problems. They simply solved them quietly over and over again, without asking for recognition or reward. Captain Lysa Thorne, who had led the expedition to find the humans, remembered Dr. Okafor's final recording. The humans had known this day would come. They had prepared for it by removing themselves from the equation and forcing the galaxy to confront its own nature. We became dependent on human mediation without realizing it, Zexthoth said. When they negotiated peace treaties, we thought we had learned to resolve conflicts diplomatically. When they facilitated trade agreements, we thought we had mastered interstellar commerce. When they shared their research freely, we thought we had created a culture of scientific cooperation. The speaker paused, letting his words sink in. The chamber was completely silent. No clicking mandibles, no electronic whispers, no rustling of exotic life forms. Everyone was listening, but we had learned nothing. We had simply become comfortable letting someone else do the hard work of maintaining civilization while we pursued our own interests. The moment the humans withdrew, we reverted to the same competitive behaviors that had plagued our species for millennia. Dr. Kresh Vor from the Axiom Institute felt a wave of shame wash over her. Her institute had won awards for research that depended on human foundations. They had taken credit for discoveries that humans had made possible through patient collaboration and freely shared knowledge. The humans tried to teach us by example, Zexthoth continued. They showed us how to compromise without losing dignity, how to compete without destroying our competitors, how to pursue our own interests while supporting the common good. But we were so focused on the results that we never learned the methods. He gestured toward the empty section where the human delegation had once sat. They realized that their presence was preventing us from developing the skills we needed to maintain civilization on our own. So they withdrew, not in anger or disappointment, but as teachers who knew their students needed to practice without help. Trade Minister Yix Molt thought about the human logistics networks that had quietly kept the galaxy's economy running. No other species had been willing to take the small contracts, serve the remote routes, or provide the emergency services that made interstellar commerce possible. They had been so busy competing for prestigious projects that they had ignored the foundation work. We have a choice, Speaker Zexthoth announced. We can continue fighting over the scraps of a broken civilization, or we can learn to do what the humans did naturally, put the long-term health of our common society ahead of our immediate individual gains. General Ironmaw stood up, his massive frame towering over the other delegates. With respect, Speaker, you make it sound simple, but the hegemony has been attacking our territory for months. How do we make peace with an enemy that wants to destroy us? Admiral Klixvar rose from her section. The Krogan military has killed thousands of our citizens. How do we forgive that? The two military commanders glared at each other across the chamber. The same anger and suspicion that had started the war still burned in their eyes. Zexthoth looked at both of them calmly. What would Ambassador Chen have done? The question hung in the air like a challenge. General Ironmaw thought about the human diplomat who had spent years learning about Krogan culture and values. Admiral Klixvar remembered the patient negotiations that had always found ways for both sides to claim victory. She would have asked what we really needed, Ironmaw said slowly. Not what we claim to want, but what our people actually required to feel safe and respected. She would have looked for solutions that addressed those needs without threatening the other side. Klixvar added reluctantly, Then do that, Zexthoth said simply. Don't wait for another human diplomat to save you from your own choices. Learn to think like humans thought. Learn to negotiate like humans negotiated. Learn to solve problems like humans solved them. The chamber erupted in voices as delegates began talking to each other, instead of shouting at the speaker. For the first time in months, representatives from different species were having actual conversations instead of formal speeches. It would take years to repair the damage caused by 1 year of conflict. The war had to end, the trade networks had to be rebuilt, and the scientific collaboration had to be restored. But for the first time since the withdrawal, there was hope that it might be possible. Zexthoth returned to his private chambers after the session ended. He was exhausted from the effort of forcing the council to face uncomfortable truths. But as he reviewed the day's proceedings, he felt a strange sense of satisfaction. In the quantum realm beyond normal space, Ambassador Chen Wei observed the council session with interest. She and her fellow humans existed now as pure consciousness, free from the limitations of physical matter. They could see the patterns of galactic civilization from perspectives impossible to biological minds. The withdrawal had been harder than most humans had expected. Watching former allies struggle and suffer went against every instinct they had developed over centuries of cooperation. But they had learned through careful study that some lessons could only be taught through experience. They're beginning to understand, Chen said to her colleague, Dr. Okafor, in the wordless communication of transcended minds. The first steps are always the hardest, Okafor replied, but they have the tools they need. We showed them how to use those tools for 50 years. Now they just need to practice. From their higher dimensional perspective, the humans could see the possible futures spreading out like branches on a vast tree. Some paths led to continued conflict and the eventual collapse of galactic civilization, but other paths showed the council species slowly learning to mediate their own disputes, manage their own trade networks, and collaborate on their own research projects.